Tonight, a national inquiry into grooming gangs and a day of shame for institutions whose job it was to protect vulnerable children and young girls. A major review finds a collective failure to address questions about the ethnicity of offenders, with available data showing that disproportionate numbers of men from Asian backgrounds were among suspects. It also finds that a significant number of the cases involve non-UK nationals and asylum seekers. I'll speak to the author of the review, Baroness Louise Casey, live on the programme. The Conservatives attack the Prime Minister for a failure of leadership. I'll also speak to the Home Office Minister, Jess Phillips. Also tonight, Donald Trump says Iran is not winning its conflict with Israel, as Tehran's state TV says it's under attack. The Prime Minister meets Donald Trump and other leaders at a G7 summit engulfed in crisis as the UK government issues new advice for British nationals in Israel. And a moment of calm in the storm. We'll look at an interesting Keir Starmer video of him enjoying the view from the Rockies and ask how they somehow made a molehill out of a mountain. Climbing every mountain with us tonight, Tom Baldwin and Laura Farris, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. The grooming gang scandal is something that has cast shame on this country. Some of the most vulnerable girls raped, abused, beaten, and then let down again by the institutions that they should have been able to trust. Ignored, dismissed, or worst of all, treated like they were the ones who had something to be ashamed of, as if they were the criminals rather than the victims. And those girls have also been let down by the Westminster debate around this that, frankly, has been more interested in political point scoring than the sexual abuse of working-class girls. But today, however, something changed with the astonishingly brave report by Baroness Louise Casey, a woman who is truly a force of nature. You know, this abuse scandal has been riven with difficulty because the crimes were predominantly carried out against white girls by British Pakistani men. And that is something that the Casey report tackles head-on. It found that in cases of child sexual exploitation, the ethnicity of perpetrators is shied away from and is still not recorded for 2/3 of perpetrators, which obviously means it's hard to gain a full picture of what's going on. She then goes on to say there is enough evidence available in local police data in 3 police force areas that we examined, which showed disproportionate numbers of men from Asian ethnic backgrounds among suspects for group-based child sexual exploitation, as well as the significant number of perpetrators of Asian ethnicity identified in local reviews and high-profile child sexual exploitation prosecutions to at least warrant further examination. Now, nowhere and at no point has that been said so clearly before. And she also goes further. The system claims there is an overwhelming problem with white perpetrators when that cannot be proved. The system. She doesn't say what the system is, but I think we all know what she means. And I have to say, it is refreshing to read a report from someone who cares so little for the opinion of the system. Louise Casey says she conducted her audit with the victims front and centre of her mind, and it showed. Well, I have to say, I am joined now by the author of the report, Baroness Casey. Thank you so much for being with us, and congratulations on your report today. Your emotional response to what happened to these girls comes across very strongly in the report. You know, at one point you decided to write a personal note to the victims and survivors to say that you believe what they said to you. You seem quite angry.
I am angry. I'm angry on behalf of the victims. I'm angry on behalf of the victims that we don't know about yet, that might be watching this programme right now and will have been abused or indeed raped at the age of 13 or 14, where they will have been told by their perpetrators, it's on you. You have now consented to sex. There's a true story. I was in Rotherham. I did the inspection into Rotherham a decade ago, as I think you know. And I interviewed or listened to, actually, a testimony of one of the survivors. And on her 13th birthday, they waited until her 13th birthday and then they multiply raped her. And I think one rape is traumatic enough. Nobody should ever have to experience it. But the thing about these sorts of crimes is they are rare in number. They are rare in number, but the sort of impact that they have, I think, on society more generally and on the victims is horrendous.
So they waited till she was 13 because they would not be prosecuted for rape. Is that why?
It makes it much harder to prosecute for rape. So I think that's one of the things which the government's accepted today, and Shabana Mahmood has absolutely, since they received the report, which, let's face it, I only gave the report to them, I think it'll be 2 weeks this Friday, it's 10 days, they will change the rape laws so that they're tightened up, because I think we have to be really clear in society, I think, as a society, as a community, that children are children. And I don't see the difference between, a 4-year-old and a 14-year-old. If somebody is doing to them, conscious of the time that we're talking, if they're doing to them what I talk about in my report, it's rape. It's rape, and we need to call it for what it is.
The part of your report that stood out to me, one of the parts of the report, was when you said we retain an ambivalent attitude to adolescent girls, both in society and in the culture of many organisations. It feels like that's what you're talking about, right?
So I think when kids are younger, we have eyes on small children. When people get pregnant, they go to the doctors, God willing, they have children in hospital, we have health visitors, we do checks when they're in small school, they're in one class and they have one teacher. Pastoral care is much, much easier for the state to keep an eye on what's happening with children. When they get to secondary school, obviously, we want them to grow up and experience independence. That's fine. But the kids I'm talking about, or the children and now young people I'm talking about, they haven't always come from, the easiest of starts. They're sometimes not in as much school as you would want them to be. They might be in care. They might have been in and out of care. And that's where the state, the safety net, I think, is failing these children. And we don't see them as children. We see them as adults, wayward teenagers, people making wrong choices. And that's why I think the law around rape has to be much clearer. Children are children, and we should prosecute people that do the sorts of things we're talking about right now as rape.
You have come, I think it's fair to say, on a bit of a journey when it comes to whether there should be a national inquiry into this. Can I ask, why did you change your mind? What have you heard or learnt in the last few months that means you now think there needs to be one?
So look, I didn't make some big pronouncement about whether there should or shouldn't be at the beginning of all of this. I thought it was right in amongst all of the sort of noise and haste, to put it mildly, in January, of all of the publicity and the accusations and, worldwide media. I thought it was right that somebody said, we just need to get a grip of this. And at the time, I thought to myself, the last thing we need is another big national inquiry. It's like, if there are people out there committing these crimes, let's spend the money that we've got on going after them.
Yeah.
If there's a safety net that needs improving for kids in care, let's spend the money. I didn't want to see taxpayers' money. So it wasn't a political thing for me. It's just like, I don't really see the necessity of this. Alexis J did a really, really good inquiry into sort of institutional failings. The thing is, the more I got into it, and the more I looked at the data, and, for example, sad to say, but when they said, we'll put some money into 5 areas coming forward that will do their own local reviews, only Oldham said, yep, we'll do that. There wasn't exactly a battering down of the door to do it. Then you look at some of the sort of serious case reviews, they rarely talk about the perpetrators. They certainly don't talk about the ethnicity of the perpetrators.
Yeah, on that...
And so I felt more and more frustrated, and I thought, well, sod this, frankly. Sorry to use that language.
That's
but,
OK, don't worry.
Sorry.
I'm not going to apologise for it, that's fair.
These are victims. These are victims, and we need to do right by them. And if that takes a statutory inquiry, I'm going to go and get one for these girls, basically. So that's where I was. And I realised it's turned into a bit of a story. That genuinely wasn't my intention.
Yeah.
You
You mentioned there the serious case reviews, and in the report you say more often than not the official reports don't discuss the perpetrators, let alone their ethnicity or any cultural drivers. There is a palpable discomfort in any discussion of ethnicity in most of them, and it feels like this is something that runs through the report. You're going there when other people have shied away. At one point you say, the system claims there is an overwhelming problem with white perpetrators when that can't be proved. What do you mean by that? Who is the system?
Well, yeah, good question. I mean, it's hard to sort of say it, and perhaps I'm also part of that system. But if you look at data collected by police, if you look at data collected by local authorities, if you look at the Home Office, that attempted in 2020, they said, we're going to do a big review. They did a big review. They said, we have to collect this data better. They then don't collect that data better. I looked at the latest data. To be fair to the last government, they had a slightly better go at it. It's a third. So you only collect ethnicity in a third of the cases, and of that third, 80% are white. That doesn't tell me that perpetrators of child sexual exploitation are white. It tells me you don't know. And I really object to that because I think it isn't fair on the victims, and it also isn't fair on Asian and Pakistani communities who are, you know, almost tarnished by that when actually the national data doesn't take you there.
And I know that the data is not there, but in the evidence that you have, the review that you've seen, do you think there is a particular issue here with some British Asian men?
Well, yes, because it's abundantly clear from the West Yorkshire police data, from the Greater Manchester police data. If you look then at South Yorkshire police data, you do have in child sexual exploitation a disproportionality. Just to give some sort of balance to this, though, in Greater Manchester, I asked for data on child sexual exploitation. That took me to Asian heritage. I asked for data on child abuse, and that took me to the general population, which is largely white. So, you know, if we just establish the facts, then you can take the pain out of this. And I think you've got sort of do-gooders that don't really want this to be found because, you know, oh, God, then all the racists are going to be more racist. Well, actually, people that are racist are going to use this anyway. All you're doing with the hate mongers and the racists is giving them more and more ammunition, whether you find it or don't find it. You have to grasp the nettle, work out what's going on and do something about it.
Follow the facts and the evidence effectively.
Follow the facts. And if anything is ever difficult, have a really good look at it.
Do you think that there has been a tendency for people who've been worried about the story to have been labelled as racist?
Yes, I mean, I found it in Rotherham. It was one of those moments in life where I was following through on a children's file, an archive, and found the word Pakistani Tipexed out. And I thought whoever did that inadvertently was giving ammunition to the English Defence League that were every week in and out campaigning and doing their stuff in that town. I think the problem is that people are worried about being called racist. In a way, they just give more ammunition to... If good people don't grasp difficult things, bad people will. And that's why we have to do it as a society.
Thank you very much indeed, Baroness Casey. Well, let's get more on this now. Our home editor, Jason Farrell, reports.
We've spoken to victims of grooming gangs across the country, and in 2022 a case was reopened in Humberside following a Sky News investigation where we found threatening Snapchats and texts, diary entries, school reports from concerned teachers and photos of injuries that all indicated teenage victims had been abused. One of them we'll call Anna. She welcomes the government's decision to launch a national inquiry.
The attitudes of the professionals, the police, social services, from what I've heard or seen, they seem very similar in every area. Police attitudes towards victims, it's not investigated properly, and then I think it ends up being a bit too late. Like our case, it's, I don't know, maybe 8 years down the line, and now they're asking witnesses for information.
Anna's experiences are all too familiar, according to today's report by Louise Casey, who found adolescent girls too often treated as adults, not children, and that police are still not properly investigating or capturing data on the offenders.
This report found that ethnicity is not recorded by the police for 2/3 of perpetrators, even though a similar report 5 years ago found exactly the same thing. Baroness Casey says instead, flawed data is repeatedly used to dismiss claims about Asian grooming gangs. And she says this only plays into the hands of those who wish to sow division in society.
The Home Secretary has accepted recommendations for compulsory collection of ethnicity data and for a national overview to look at reopening historic cases.
And on the key issues of ethnicity that I'd asked her to examine, she has found continued failure to gather proper, robust national data, despite concerns being raised going back very many years. In the local data that the audit examined from 3 police forces, they identify clear evidence of overrepresentation among suspects of Asian and Pakistani heritage men. And she refers to examples of organisations avoiding the topic altogether for fear of appearing racist or raising community tensions.
All leading to the government launching a national inquiry, which earlier this year they had described as unnecessary, a clear U-turn.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's handling of this scandal is an extraordinary failure of leadership. His judgment has once again been found wanting. Since he became Prime Minister, he and the Home Secretary dismissed calls for an inquiry because they did not want to cause a stir. They accused those of us demanding justice for the victims of this scandal as, and I quote, jumping on a far-right bandwagon. Yes.
The Prime Minister on a trip to Canada, forced to defend his reasoning.
As a safeguard, I asked Louise Casey to look again, do an audit, to see if there's anything that had been missed. She's carried out that audit, she's presented that to me, I've read it in full, and on the basis of what she's found, she says there should be a national inquiry. I've looked at her report, I've considered that material, I think she's right, and that's why there'll be a national inquiry.
Anna will welcome new laws to protect children from being blamed for the crimes committed against them. Obtaining her police records using a subject access request, she found officers appeared to blame her for lifestyle choices and putting herself at risk.
Every time I look at it, I still think it's shocking. It was the same sort of terminology: lifestyle choices, liar, attention seeker, and the majority of it was negative, like bad attitude. It was really rare that I'd come across something where they were actually listening or they were concerned.
Baroness Casey's report contains a whole chapter titled Denial. She says it's time for honesty and a focus on protecting children. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former Labour Director of Communications, author of Keir Starmer, the biography, Tom Baldwin, and the former Conservative MP and Victims and Safeguarding Minister, Laura Farris. Great to have you both with us. Laura, what do you make of the audit published today by Baroness Casey?
Well, characteristically of her, it's a very powerful, clear piece of work. I think I'd always had a view on this because I worked on the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse and before I became an MP, and I've heard it sort of misrepresented so many times as if it had provided any answers on grooming gangs. And the truth is, we looked at the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, children's homes in Nottingham. We looked at Dolphin Square, all that historic stuff. Nearly all the victims who gave evidence had grey hair. There was a tiny, tiny bit on the grooming gangs. And if you read that section of the report, ethnicity gets no mention at all. And Alexis Jay's predecessor, Lal Goddard, the chair of that inquiry, was said to have said in her capacity as chair that she thought there was a link between Asian men and children victims of sexual abuse, and she left the following month under a cloud. So it's worth remembering that for some time it's been really, really hard to say this, so much so that Alexis Jay said nothing at all in ICSA.
It does feel quite brave. Do you agree, Tom, that she has been so explicit on tackling this head on and saying, look, we just need to follow the evidence?
I need to get the evidence as well. I mean, there's lots of people. I mean, she's right. Yeah, there are people for good reasons, do-gooding reasons, as she said in her interview with you, who didn't want to address that. There are other people, I think more sinister people, who want to say it's all about being Asian. It's not. It's nothing to do with being Asian. It's about whether there's prevalence of that in particular community among certain people. Now, that is her desire to get to hard facts, evidence, to have action rather than just words. And I think that's the real courage of this, is like to actually try and take the politics and the heat out of this and say, let's actually establish the facts.
Although, Sophie, I think you have to be honest. If you read the sentencing remarks in any one of those cases, in Oxford, High Wycombe, Rochdale, Bradford, Keighley, if you find them online and read them, it is overwhelming the ethnicity of the perpetrators, the age of the victims, the circumstances of the victims, which usually appear in the background sort of preamble. I mean, I represented a young girl, well, she was an adult by the time she became somebody I represented as a barrister who'd been a victim in Telford. And, you know, the countless episodes of abuse that she'd relayed to the local authority, to the care home, which she spent part of her childhood, to the police on multiple occasions. And by the time she reached me, we were having to pursue the case as a civil action rather than a criminal case, because ultimately she'd exhausted all routes. And that was a very difficult message to deliver, because I think she was looking for more than that when she came to see me and the solicitor who was also acting for her.
Sorry, that must have been hard
It
for
was
you.
hard.
Because
It was
you kind
hard.
of must feel responsibility and...
Well, I think about her. I don't know her anymore, but, you know, I mean, she didn't get justice. That is as simple as that. She got a civil remedy of a very limited variety, and she's had her life ruined. And she was 20 when I first met her, and so she'd probably be nearer to 30 now.
It's awful. And I think that's that in the Casey report, she has a personal note to victims that I found very moving.
Yes.
When she said that I can't legally prove what they've said, but I believe them, I believe what they said. And even that acknowledgement it feels so
There's
important.
so much consistency in their accounts as well, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that's showing respect to victims and survivors should be at the heart of this. I just watched some of the stuff we've seen today, and I don't think it's respectful to victims and survivors to be trying to make this a political football or them a political football. You know, there are failures right across the system by successive governments, by successive members of the establishment. And if people want to sort of try and turn this into, oh, well, you didn't call it, I mean, this is...
So I'm going to push back really gently and respectfully.
Fine.
I think to say that both sides have failed in some regard is true, but I do think the politicisation did happen initially in the Labour ranks. And I think about Anne Cryer when she sort of effectively blew the whistle when she was the MP for Keighley. She's spoken very honestly about the levels of abuse she received from her own political party because of what she said about the ethnicity of the perpetrators. That was decades ago, and it took a really long time. And even as recently as, you know, this year, the language of far-right dog whistles has crept in. Now, I appreciate, Tom, I know what you're saying, but you're saying it's become unpleasantly toxic, and I agree with that. So I'm not.
You can throw us around. You can say there were 20 recommendations of Alexis Jay's review, which the Tories didn't implement one. This government's implemented 17. No. You can do that. You can do that. You can actually point out that Keir Starmer, when he was Director of Public Prosecutions in 2012, was the first Director of Public Prosecutions who called the files in, said, is there a pattern here? Let's have a look at these cases. Let's review these cases. He's actually been one of the people, I think, who deserves praise for exposing this. And when I see Kemi Ballantyne out there, former Children's Minister, saying, oh, it's all about Keir Starmer, this is an issue about our society. It's an issue about what's happened with our establishment not taking victims and survivors seriously enough. You've got a Prime Minister, actually, I think has gone in quite interesting history of doing precisely that, taking them seriously enough. And you've got Kemi Ballantyne trying to make political capital out of it. And as Louise Casey herself has said today, that's unedifying.
OK, thanks both. We are out of time, but it's great to have you both on the programme. Thank you for a really sensitive discussion about what has been, you know, I think something that has been a pretty shameful episode in this country. Thank you. Well, shortly before coming on air, I did speak to Jess Phillips, the Safeguarding Minister at the Home Office. Thank you so much for being on the programme. What is your reaction to Dame Louise Casey's review?
Look, I've worked in this field for many years and in some cases worked alongside Louise Casey and the people who appear in her review. So a lot of it wasn't a huge surprise to me, but it makes me feel incredibly angry and incredibly tired that it tracks a period from 2009 to 2025 of this review, that review, and very little change. And that makes me feel cross, angry, upset. But I'm eternally grateful to her for the audit that she has undertaken, and I think her recommendations are good and strong. The difference, I suppose, that has to be the case on these recommendations is that they have to be delivered.
I before I ask this question, I want to make it really clear that you, as you allude to, have got an incredible track record in helping women and girls who are the victims of sexual crimes. It's something you've dedicated your life to, right? But my question is this, there is nothing in this audit, as you say, that we didn't know before. So why did Labour vote against a national inquiry into grooming gangs at the beginning of the year, but now you've changed your mind?
Well, look, I never didn't want any inquiries, and that was never, ever the point. What I have seen from my experience is national inquiries leading to no change, which is exactly what Louise Casey has found. The inquiries, whether it was in Rotherham back in 2013, right up until the ICSA recommendations undertaken by Professor Alexis Jay, which just sat on a shelf. And so you have to understand my concern about spending millions on inquiries that don't lead to any change. What I had seen over the years is really good local inquiries in Telford, where I supported some of the victims, that actually led to direct change. Now, the victims in those cases...
So why have you changed your mind then? That's the question.
So the victims in those cases in Telford, when they came to see us some months ago, one of the complaints that they made was that it might change things locally, it hasn't changed anything nationally, and none of the findings have led to any national change. And funnily enough, one of them actually is around taxis, which appears in Louise Casey's review. And so I take that on board. I also met victims recently who said, I don't want a big national inquiry, I don't want another ICSA. What I want is a local inquiry with the power to compel people. And so Louise Casey, what she has suggested is that. She has suggested a series of local investigations that have the power of a national body, of a national inquiry, to compel places to undertake them and to compel witnesses. And that was an issue that needed ironing out. And I come to this view, having spoken to Louise Casey, looked at her evidence and also looked at what the victims have been telling me.
I want to ask you about the specifics in this audit as well, from what Dame Louise Casey is saying specifically about ethnicity, because she is pretty brave with what she's saying, I think, in this.
Oh, I think she's factual.
Do you think there is a specific problem with British Asian men and perhaps specifically British Pakistani men and group child sexual exploitation?
Some British Pakistani men, yes, there is it doesn't matter what I think. The evidence is there. How people think about this should never have been the thing that anybody paid any attention to. Because some people think that all people of Pakistani origin are abusers, and some people think that none of them are. Thinking has got us nowhere. What the ICSA recommendation was that we needed better ethnicity data. We still don't have it. What Baroness Casey has recommended, which we will undertake, is the mandatory recording of ethnicity of perpetrators of child sexual abuse. What she has looked at, admittedly, just in 3 police force areas in the review, found an overrepresentation of Asian or British Pakistani origin males. It doesn't matter how I feel about that. Those are the facts. And if we ignore that, how can we ever come up with solutions?
It feels like at the heart of this is misogyny.
Of course, they're all men, aren't they? That's the other characteristic that all of these abusers have.
And this belief that the girls were, the children, were worthless.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, I think that sometimes in the debate about the ethnicity, which, it has been, that's not new news. This has been written in many reviews over the years. It's just nothing has ever been done about it to improve the data. We will do that. But what often gets lost for me is actually the way we dismiss women's and especially young girls' voices. Treat them as if they're criminals, treat them as if they're, sluts and hussies and they were asking for it. That existed for far too long. And one of the things that we will do off the back of this report, and we're trained to do anyway, is get rid of the convictions for anyone under 18 who was accused of being a prostitute. These are children. And so, yeah, the misogyny, as much as anything else, lies at the heart of this.
And as you said, the state reaction to it, but I guess also the perpetrators as well.
Oh, yeah,
and do you think that there is an issue with misogyny in certain cultures and communities as well?
I've not yet found a certain community that doesn't have a problem with misogyny. There is no shortage of women on the list I read out every year from every single community that lives in the UK that have murdered their partners or murdered a stranger woman on the street. But look, I think that what Baroness Casey finds is that nobody's ever looked into the cultural aspect of what leads to that group being overrepresented in this crime. That is why we have committed to do a piece of research into that. But if you could tell me which particular community has absolutely no misogyny, I might go and live there.
Well, the findings on grooming gangs are sure to dominate tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Sam Shah. Now, our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates has been looking in some more detail at what is in Louise Casey's report and its political significance.
Grooming gangs and the national inquiry that Keir Starmer did not want. Today, we have had the damning 200-page audit that explains why the government's troubleshootings are. Louise Casey, Baroness Casey, thinks that it is vital. And really, it's because this whole thing has been going on for so long. The timescale of this report goes all the way back to 2009. In 2010, there were prosecutions of Asian men targeting young women in Derbyshire and Rotherham. And since then, you've had newspaper reports and documentaries and dramas and local and national inquiries. And Louise Casey says we are a country still in denial, still not dealing with the problem. And it's still going on. Look at this. You can see that the report says that they identified around 700 recorded offences of group-based child sexual exploitation in 2023. And it says it's highly unlikely that this accurately reflects the true scale of the problem. So it's probably bigger back then. And now I want you to look at this a few pages later in the report. It actually goes on to say identification of child sexual abuse and exploitation is falling in children's services despite a rise in police reports of child sexual abuse. So a rise in one place and a fall in other reporting, that suggests that there is a problem that's going undetected, all of which is very different to what you hear from these people.
We have taken action.
We can never allow that to happen again.
Today's announcements represent the most robust response of any government to tackle this awful crime.
So this is quite something. The report also says that ethnicity is shied away from despite being a question for many years and is still not recorded in 2/3 of perpetrators. So we're not collecting the data properly, according to this report. But then it goes on as well and says these three councils, Greater Manchester, South Yorkshire and West Yorkshire, the data there shows that there has been disproportionately group-based child sexual exploitation offending by men of Asian ethnicity. So while the data isn't complete, they are certain of a clear link. But this is something that really shocked me in the report. More often than not, it says, in official reports done at a local level, they do not discuss the perpetrators, let alone their ethnicity or any cultural drivers. There is a palpable discomfort in any discussion of ethnicity in most of them. There you have it, the discomfort of the local system dealing with the ethnic background of perpetrators. Now look at this. This is why Louise Casey wants there to be a national inquiry, because it can, an independent commission, would set strict timescales and terms of reference for the local investigations, which would have a single appointed legal team with full statutory powers available to them to be able to compel witnesses where they refuse to cooperate. So you can drag people, even in historic cases, before the inquiries. An important moment. It's surprising it's taken so long. Let's look at what Keir Starmer was saying just a few months ago.
Why won't he have a national inquiry?
Mr. Speaker, we've had a national inquiry. We've had recommendations.
That inquiry will now take place. Time limited. Will it be a turning point in this whole affair?
Sam Coates there. Well, let's stay with this. And Dominic Cummings has told Sky News apparently there were Whitehall officials who wanted a total cover-up of the scandal during his time as chief advisor to Boris Johnson. He's also suggested that included trying to block a national inquiry. He was speaking to our political correspondent, Liz Bates.
Officials came to me in the Department of Education and said, there's this Times journalist who wants to write this story about these gangs. The local authority wants to judicially review it and stop the Times publishing the story. So I went to Michael Gove and said, this council is trying to actually stop... What, was it Rotherham? Yeah. It's trying to stop this, and they're going to use judicial review. You should tell the council that far from siding with the council to stop the Times, you will write to the judge and hand over a whole bunch of documents and actually blow up the council's JR. Gove, to his credit, and various other officials strongly agreed with me. So it's a classic thing in Whitehall, right? Some officials wanted a total cover-up and were on the side of the council. In the end, there will be an inquiry. It'll be a total for Whitehall because it will reveal how much Whitehall worked to try and cover up the whole thing.
Tom and Laura join us again. Laura, I know you can't comment on the specifics, but does it ring true that there was this reluctance, like within Whitehall, to get to the truth?
I think that is true, and I discussed it with Baroness Casey actually before we came in. And one of the things I recall from my time at the Home Office was that the definition of group-based offending was confined to 2 or more offenders, which meant it brought in a lot of familial offending, and also it didn't differentiate between child perpetrators and adult perpetrators, so it captured all the things that might happen in schools, which it meant that you didn't get a clear picture of the grooming gangs and their modus operandi, and you had this very blurry picture, which frankly served to obfuscate rather than illuminate the true picture. So I have to say, I think there were errors of categorisation, and you've read her report. That is effectively her first finding.
Yeah, the data is so important. Tom,
Yeah.
what's your take on it?
I mean, yeah, data, facts, evidence, action, not hot air, not words, not, just sort of soaping the public on this. That's where we need to be. And if Louise Casey's achieved anything today, it's about trying to reset this. This is not an issue which you can gain political points out of, and anyone trying to do so really should be ashamed of themselves. This is an issue about a failure of the state, a failure of the authorities, and a failure actually to establish the facts even now.
Okay.
And that's the sober position anyone involved in politics should take. And some of the stuff that's knocking around today in reaction to it, I think it's embarrassing.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, the Prime Minister promises to push for de-escalation in the conflict between Israel and Iran as he meets other world leaders at the G7 summit. Hello, welcome back. G7 leaders, including Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, have gathered in Canada for a summit that was going to focus on global trade, but has been somewhat hijacked by events in the Middle East. Speaking ahead of today's round of talks, the Prime Minister reiterated his desire to find a diplomatic solution to the conflict between Israel and Iran.
Well, it is really important that we focus on de-escalation because the risks of the conflict escalating are obvious. Across the region and beyond the region, the impact that this could and probably will have on Gaza, which is a tinderbox, and of course the impact on the economy. That is why at the G7 there's such a focus on de-escalation. That'll be an intense discussion for our talks today, but we have to find a way to de-escalate the situation, notwithstanding the concerns that we all have about the nuclear programme. There's no doubt about that. Notwithstanding, we all accept Israel's right to self-defence, of course, but there must be de-escalation, and that will be the central focus of much of the discussion today.
How far apart is President Trump and other European leaders, such as President Macron and you, and also Prime Minister Carney of Canada? How far apart on de-escalation, and how do you persuade Trump to persuade Netanyahu?
Well, I spoke to President Trump just in recent days, and of course Prime Minister Netanyahu, and to pretty well all of the G7 leaders yesterday. And I do think there's a consensus for de-escalation. Obviously, what we need to do today is to bring that together and to be clear about how it is to be brought about. But the risk of the conflict escalating is obvious, I think, and the implications, not just for the region, but globally, are really immense. And so the focus has to be on de-escalation. Now, we're just arriving for the beginning of these talks. We haven't started the sessions yet, so there's going to be a whole day of discussions about a whole manner of things, including the economy, the global economy, and a number of other matters. But this will be a central issue.
Prime Minister there speaking to our political editor, Beth Rigby, who is at the G7 summit in Alberta and joins us now. Beth, some difficult diplomacy for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely, Sophie. I mean, look, leaders were coming into this summit thinking that they would be talking about Ukraine. President Zelensky expected here tomorrow, and also about global trade, global supply chains, energy security, but all of it blown out of the water because of the continued fighting between Iran and Israel, the most serious in decades. It's been going on for 4 days and shows no sign of abating, and the Prime Minister very clear in that clip this morning, the first time we've properly heard from him actually on the issue of Israel-Iran, on camera at least, saying the priority is to de-escalate and intense discussions underway. And look, at the heart of this is President Trump. He is considered the key to all of it. The Prime Minister will be meeting him later today, and we hope to bring you that meeting when it happens and what is said in it. But why is President Trump so key? Quite simply because there is a view within the UK government that he is the man to try and de-escalate, because if Israel stops its attacks against Iran, Iran says it will come back to the negotiating table. It will be ready to negotiate around its nuclear programmes. Israel, though, the issue they have is that Israel at the moment is saying that they are controlling Iranian airspace, that they are in a position to win this fight. So it doesn't look like Benjamin Netanyahu is willing to back down at the moment. And so what President Trump does, whether he will call publicly for Israel to de-escalate, whether he will press them to de-escalate, that is the very live question here at the summit. He has said that the two sides are ready to do a deal. He said that on Truth Social as he was coming to the G7. But that really is the focus of the talks today. And while other issues are very important around trade and also, of course, Ukraine, this is definitely the centrepiece of discussions. I should say, though, as well, the Prime Minister also told us this morning that he expects that UK-US trade deal that was provisionally agreed in May to be imminently finalised. So there could be some good news for the Prime Minister coming out of what was already looking like a very tricky summit.
Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there, our political editor. Well, at 9 o'clock tonight, The World with Yalda Hakim will be live from Jerusalem. Yalda has been speaking to the Israeli president, and you can see that interview in full at 9 p.m. Right, let's talk again, shall we, to Laura and Tom. Tom, it's so delicate, the diplomacy on this, isn't it? So it's so difficult. Do you think Keir Starmer's got it about right?
I think in foreign policy in general, he wants to be judged, again, by actions and outcomes rather than words. He's not someone who postures. I mean, someone's criticised the left for, not having a go at Trump or not being loud enough in his criticism of Israel over Gaza. I think he's always taken a view that, we don't have a lot of influence in the Middle East. I mean, that's been undermined over the last decades. But where he can have influence is by being a stable, serious, grown-up ally. And that, I think, is what he's doing. I think you seeing him on the global stage is actually, he understands the nuance and the difficulty of diplomacy, and he edges forward towards better outcomes. That's very him, in a way that sort of taking the barricades and denouncing people at a loud hailer might actually work for him politically, but it's not going to produce a better outcome in the region.
Laura, I'm interested in how you think the international community should be dealing with Israel, because it's difficult, isn't it? There'll be some who are thinking, look, they need to be calling out Israel and taking far stronger action, given what's happening in Gaza. There'll be others who are like, Israel is effectively under attack from Iran, we need to support an ally.
Well, I think I agree with Tom, actually, that I think that the sort of sotto voce approach to Donald Trump that the Prime Minister has taken has been helpful for him. It helped to get that trade deal over the line. And I think ultimately the answer to this is with President Trump. And I think, the wise heads in Washington will see the obvious parallels with the 2003 invasion of Iraq, where again there was a desire to replace the regime. There was the spectre of nuclear threat or chemical weapons threat, and that disarmament exercise. And when all of that was achieved, they were left with a quagmire. Many American lives were lost, something they couldn't really extricate themselves from. And although Iran is not a perfect parallel, there will be the memories of that, I think, that will be an important consideration for President Trump. And if I was in Keir Starmer's shoes, those would be the kind of things I'd be reminding him of, and also the risk of yet another energy crisis where oil prices go through the roof, and that is unsustainable in the long term. So,
I mean, I think it's worth pointing out, that, since Labour have been in government, they've dropped Britain's opposition to Netanyahu being prosecuted in the International Criminal Court. They've taken sanctions against some members of the Israeli government. They've got rid of all but a tiny, tiny amount of arms sales, which you can't really get rid of because they're in a pool. And those are actions, they're not words. But I think it's really important that, again, loud noise rather than substance doesn't help. It's so delicate. We have limited influence, and we have to use that influence wisely in a grown-up fashion rather than shout about it.
I know you have got some kind of foreign policy experience as well. I mean, how worried are you about this situation with Iran and Israel?
I think it's a conflict that I never thought would actually happen because of the obviously superior military might of Israel and the just inherent unpredictability of Iran and its leadership. And I think the same reasons that made me think it wouldn't happen are what make me fear the potential outcome now, because I think the risk is if the Iranian leadership feel cornered that they do something extreme. And I have no real insight into how that leadership or political system works because it's so closed.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, isn't it? I guess it's the unpredictability. People perhaps not playing by the rules that others do and just not knowing where it's going to go. Really interesting debate. Thank you both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. The video of the Prime Minister enjoying the majesty of the Canadian Rockies that somehow makes a molehill out of a mountain. We've jazzed it up for them. That's next.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, a collective failure to address the ethnicity of grooming gangs. That is the verdict of a damning review, which found flawed data was used to dismiss concerns, and officials dodged the issue for fear of being called racist. Coming up, we'll be discussing the report's findings and its recommendations, asking what this new national inquiry will actually achieve. All that and much more on the UK Tonight from 8.
So direct hit on the hospital. Absolutely bodies are full and they're all gunshot wounds. Absolute carnage here.
We hear a lot about the dead in this conflict, but there are going to be so many disabled people.
We could make a difference here and stop the war, and if we don't, I don't think there will be anything to come back to.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force. It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
What country are you
From the UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
They are pushing forward, trying to get people to disperse.
What Prince Harry wanted to do was to eject me.
Is that your opinion?
It is. It is.
They were serious, coordinated attacks.
It's an entire generation that will have to contend with the horrifying impacts of this conflict.
The number of patients is increasing.
It's been quite some day.
Hey, what country are you
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country?
You've gone viral.
I've ever had such a reaction.
It's just incredible.
Since the Oval Office meeting, have they reached out to you?
If Ukraine asks for help and its allies decide to help, then that's the end of it.
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today. Beth Rigby from Sky.
You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
There could be some more painful decisions to come.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome back. Well, as we've been discussing, the Prime Minister is in Canada, and despite arriving in the middle of an international crisis, he did find some time to take a walkabout in the natural splendour of the Rocky Mountains. But his home movie wasn't exactly a cinematic production. Well, we on the Politics Hub did think there was a bit more they could have done, you know, given the stunning surroundings. So we had a go. So our producer, Emily, there, working on magic. She's going to be snapped up with the number 10 press office if we don't watch it. Tom, what do you reckon? Much better second time round, right?
I mean, you just make everything better. But look, the truth is, anyone who has been talking about Keir Starmer the last few years wouldn't say he makes too many slick videos. They wouldn't say he appears in too many nice backdrops. So I can see why they're doing it, but I mean, we also know he's not there on holiday. It's, you know, there's serious issues there. And
you put the video up, though. It was the number 10 who put the video up.
Because it's all people like you who say, why do we never see him in anything other than a suit staring back from you from a desk? And so look,
Philip's put him in a suit wandering around with a...
Yeah, so they're now going to have the Starmers as Von traps, but I mean, look, I think there's no harm in it, but he's definitely not on holiday.
Yeah. What did they ever try and make you do any sort of jazzy videos in your time, Laura?
You can't win. You can't win as a politician if you do something like that. You know, I mean, it's so obvious he's not really enjoying himself. In the scene of him walking, he's got about 30 people around.
Yeah, exactly. He's got security
flanking him.
Someone's told him get out there, walk in front of the mountain.
He's probably been made to do it. I do think if there's any lessons from this, maybe the number 10 press team could have a little chat with Sky and add a bit of music next to
Little bit soundtrack. What about when you were working with Labour, when you were working with Ed Miliband? Did you try and get him to do stuff like this, or did you just leave well alone?
Ed's whole thing was that he wanted more spontaneity in his public appearances, which, then leads to the world's most ridiculous story and the most world's, where, the fact he's eating a bacon sandwich at a cafe because, so you can get absolutely murdered for a picture which goes wrong. It wasn't a photo opportunity. It was just like he wants to go and have a bacon sandwich and he didn't want us telling him he shouldn't do it. Fair enough. But there are dangers for politicians doing anything, walking anywhere, eating anything, and that's part of the silliness of politics.
Okay.
The thing is, though, some politicians are Teflon, because people like Boris could get away with anything.
We're out of time.
Well, he didn't in the end, did he?
No.
Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have you both. That is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next is UK Tonight with Sarah Jane, me, and then, of course, we've got the special programme with Yalda at 9 p.m. The World with Yalda Hakeem.